Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Bridgehead. My name is Jonathon Van Maren, and today we're going to be having a discussion about religious liberty, but not in the United States or Canada. We've discussed both of those issues on this show before, but in Europe. And we're going to be talking to somebody that I interviewed before, so some of you might recognize her. Her name is Iben Thranholm, and she's a Danish journalist. Now, what's interesting, actually, last time we spoke with her, we talked about the crisis of European masculinity, and then we ended up talking about, by the end of that conversation, about the spiritual vacuum that essentially Islam was taking advantage of, and that essentially, this crisis in Europe as the result of massive amounts of migrants coming in from Muslim countries was partially due to the fact that Europe had no coherent belief system of its own. Well, recently she actually got in trouble for those points of view. She's been included on a European Union blacklist for comments that she made about migrant policy. And those comments, in which she more or less said a lot of the things that she said in our previous interview about there being a spiritual vacuum, about her reservations regarding migrant policy, and she had said some things about resurgent Christianity in Russia over the past couple of decades. She's done some reporting from there, and it seems that the EU, according to her, are trying to blacklist journalists by tying them to the Kremlin, by essentially saying that you're a puppet of the Russians. These tactics, she says, are very much like witch hunts or Joseph McCarthy's Red Scare, and this has been strongly objected to not only by her but actually by a Danish minister as well. But she's been included on this European Union blacklist. So she's gotten into a lot of trouble for her opinions, but I always find her insights very interesting and very fascinating. So we had her back on the show to talk about religious liberty in Europe, and this is that conversation. So I want to kind of discuss the state of religious liberty in Europe. We've been having this discussion here in Canada and in the United States for quite some time, and there's not a lot of attention paid by people in North America to what's going on in Europe. So I was just to get a general idea from you, what is the state of religious liberty for Christians in Europe, especially where you come from in Denmark, Scandinavia?
Well, basically, of course, or formally, there is the freedom of religion, but I think it's more and more under pressure. But it's not like that. The politicians are making laws against religion in that sense, but it's just now, it also depends on if you're speaking about Christianity or you're speaking about Islam, because we see that there is a tendency to open up to Islamic rules and to accept Islamic rules, as where you see there is a tendency to ban everything that is Christian.
Right.
So it means it depends on what kind of religion you have, because if you're a Muslim, the political establishment, the political class would be very open to you. If you are Christian, they would be very, very, very close and very, I would even say they would try to stop you in many ways or they would not respect your traditional beliefs. That's what it's all about. If you are a Christian that can embrace modernity and just, for many traditional Christians, this would be a kind of misguided Christianity. But if you are willing to just be a cultural Christian, you have no problem. But if you are a conservative, traditional believer, you're really into troubles. And I think that we will see in the future that it will be criminalized, many of our beliefs. Like, for instance, priests that do not want to marry homosexuals. So if you say that you are against it, just saying that you are against it could be a hate crime, considered a hate crime. And then you can be criminalized for that. You can go into jail for that. And I think it's mainly about this homosexual agenda. If you don't accept that and you don't embrace that, you're really into trouble. There will also be jobs you cannot get. Abortion we have had for a long time, but still it's not accepted to be against abortion. If you'll be looked upon as somebody who's weird if you are not for it. But I think in general that Christians are psychologically persecuted. It means that you know that you're not part of the good circle, And if you stand up for your views, you will be socially marginalized. That's why many Christians in the West do not speak openly about their faith. They actually are silenced by this psychological pressure, that there is this kind of spirit in our society where it is accepted that to be a Christian, a traditional Christian, is something backwards and something that should not have any impact on our society. It should be really silenced. So people that have those traditional views, they know. So they need, if they want to keep their jobs and, keep their friends and be part of the good social club, they need to shut up. That is the situation here. But I mean, it's not anything that you can put onto paper or you can say, well, this is the government who made this. But there is already this psychological pressure, and it always but it's always like that before the law or new rules would be applied. I was just in Moscow the other day, and they said that to me that the atmosphere that we are experiencing here as Christians in Europe was exactly the same atmosphere before the revolution in Russia, the communist revolution. So it means that this kind of mockery and this kind of that you are despised and you are looked upon as somebody who's a weirdo or even insane, and that you need treatment. It was exactly the same that happened before the revolution, up in those years up to the revolution. So I think it is a similar thing that we are experiencing. So I am expecting laws to go against traditional Christian belief. And you also see it with this American presidential election or this campaign. It's clearly that Hillary's agenda is anti-Christian, and that is in the favor of everybody and also the media. Nobody is asking any questions. It's just accepted.
Yeah.
And this is the Western culture today.
What are some indications from governments in Scandinavia that they're ready to make moves on Christians? I heard one story, I don't know if it's true, that they had decreed that gay marriages had to be held in churches if the couple tried to rent that church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, right now, the Danish state church, it is a folks church, but it's actually the state who is the master of the church. It is the church minister, not the bishop. It was actually the former church minister who was forcing this. That the homosexuals could be legally married in the church, despite that half of the church members were against it. So it was actually forced into the church, and you can, as a priest, you can say no. If your conscience tells you not to do it, you can say, I don't want to marry those homosexuals. But in the end, you won't get a ministry anywhere. There would be nobody who wants to let you be a priest in their parish if you're not willing to do it. So in effect, it means that you have to do it if you would like to be sure. There are a few parishes where they would be against it, but the main attitude is that if you don't want to do this, nobody wants to hire you as a priest. So it means that in a way you are forced to do it if you want to be a priest or a pastor in Denmark. So I think there are many ways of putting pressure on people, and there is a lot of social pressure, a lot of social control, which of course the media is not writing about because they're also anti-Christian. You can't rely on the media anymore because they're part of this anti-Christian agenda.
Right.
So they don't want to create a debate about it and also point out that it's wrong and it is against democracy. So that's why Christians are just suffering in silence here. And I think it's only going to get worse. If you go to there is an Austrian NGO organization which is called Observatory on Intolerance and Discriminations Against Christians. There you have all the cases, a lot of files about these discriminations against Christians, and you would be extremely surprised if you look at their website, because 80% of all religious-motivated hate crimes in Europe is targeted against Christians, not Muslims and Jews, but Christians. 80% of all religious-motivated hate crimes are against Christians. So it's everywhere, but as I said before, because the media are anti-Christian, you won't hear about it. It's simply not a matter of discussion because this is their agenda. So if nobody knows, who cares? It's only Christians. So I guess it's even worse than we are aware of, but since there is no focus on it, it's hard to say what's really going on. But it is, I know, I give a lot of talks in a lot of churches and among clergy circles, and I think the biggest problem is fear. People are simply very fearful because they know that they are up against the wall and they have this social pressure. So it's better just to keep quiet and do nothing. And I'm very much against that. I think it's really the wrong development. Mm-hmm. And I see that we will see persecutions of Christians. And also with this influx of migrants and refugees coming from Islamic cultures, you see that in many of those refugee centers, asylum centers, that there is a very, very hard persecution against Christians from those migrants. It's a huge problem. But again, the media won't tell you the story because they don't care, because it's just Christians. I mean, even German police said that Christians should have their own centers because they are not capable of controlling the situation. And there is so much harassment and violence against Christians, so they have no control anymore. The same thing is happening here in Denmark. There are a lot of Christians, also converts, in those asylum centers that are harassed every day. But nobody really seems to care about it. And if it goes on in the asylum centers, it's just a matter of time when we would see it also in the broader society.
Well, what's interesting, though, I was just going to say, you had said earlier, though, and this is something I've been trying to figure out, because it is true. It's not just true in Europe. It's also true out here. But to a large degree, the media does treat Muslim refugees and Muslims or Islam just in general much better than they do Christianity. But the traditional reasons they reject Christianity, like Christianity doesn't accept gay marriage, Christianity is pro-life, all those things, like the same thing applies to Islam, but even more so in many circumstances. So why this disparity? Why would they support one group of people who don't agree with them on anything over the other?
Well, I mean, you cannot understand what's happening in the world today if you don't look at it from a spiritual point of view or a spiritual perspective. You can't understand it if you only look at it from a political perspective, because then it doesn't make sense. I mean, why should the liberals, the left wing, advocate or even defend Islamic people who are, as you just mentioned, are exactly the same or have the same values as many traditional Christians? Why should they, try to defend them? There is only one explanation, and that is that the liberals, the secularists, and the Islamic people, they have made a kind of unholy alliance that they want to destroy the Christian culture. It's simply anti-Christian agenda for both sides. And that means that they are having some kind of joint venture to destroy the Christian culture in America and in Europe. And I don't have any idea why the liberals are not that clever so that they will understand that in the end, the Islamists would also go against them, and they will be defeated as well, and the whole culture will probably be Islamic. It's extremely irrational, and the only thing that explains it is that they simply have so much hatred against the Christian culture that they need to side up even with their own enemies. It's extremely irrational, but I thought a lot about it, and I don't see any other answers. It's simply, today the world is in a big spiritual battle between those people who want to keep the tradition, keep the Christian foundation, and the other ones who simply want to break it down, to destroy it completely. And there, the liberals has a kind of common cause with the terrorists and the Islamists and Muslims in general. And it's hard to understand, but I guess this is what's happening actually.
So where do you see the way forward? So you say that you suspect new rules will be passed and persecution will take place. What are some indications, besides the psychological pressure on on Christians and the cultural pressure, frankly, just not to act Christian. What other indicators do you see of that taking place?
Well, I think it's everywhere. It's for instance, I mean, look at what's happening now in America with all the WikiLeaks. I mean, it's clear that Hillary and her people want to break down every Christian tradition in America, and Hillary even said that that the church has to bend to her politics. She said that earlier. And it's a very strong movement in many ways, and I think it's also here in Europe. It's in every detail. It's in the whole culture that modernity and I mean also globalism is about breaking down the Christian tradition, at least when it comes to the West. So we have this influx of all sorts of new cultures and everything that we used to build our morals on, our moral compass, our beliefs, our whole worldview, is completely destroyed and deconstructed. And then they want a new world order somehow to come out of that. And let's see who's going to be the winner, whether it's going to be the Islamic worldview or the more globalist worldview that will be the winner. But I think it's important because the church is asleep in the West. Mm-hmm. They have sort of, they have this kind of, I think the church is suffering from a misguided understanding of what is compassion and what is the role of the church.
Right.
And it means that, for instance, when it comes to, let's look at history. I mean, it was because of Christianity that the Berlin Wall finally came down and communism was defeated, not because of democracy that, many politicians here, they like to say, well, it was because of the democracy in the West that communism finally collapsed. That's not true. I mean, the reason why it collapsed was because that, for instance, the former Pope, John Paul II, he went on several pilgrimages to Poland where he was allowed to speak to the Polish people. And he reminded them about their Christian identity. He said, listen, you are not the people they tell you that you are. You belong to your Christian heritage. You belong to Christianity. And then he said two words that changed the whole situation was, fear not, he said. And he repeated that over and over again. Do not be afraid. Fear not, he said. And Lech Walesa, which was the head of this whole solidarity movement in Poland, he was very Catholic. And he told also later on that it was of such huge importance that the Christian Catholic message was in the center of everything. And it gave them the moral compass and the moral strength to stand up against the communist regime. And now later on, it turns out that also that the anniversary, the 1,000-year anniversary of the Russian Orthodox Church, which was in 1988, was crucial for what came only 3 years after that when the whole system collapsed, because Gorbachev invited the Orthodox leaders to come to the Kremlin to talk to him about how they would make this anniversary. They wanted that there should be a lot of events and things like that to celebrate it. And that opening made a huge impact on the Russian people. And I think it will be the same thing for Europe if the Christian church will not be awakened like it was before the communist regime collapsed. We would not, I mean, Europe cannot continue the way we know Europe or the West. So it's actually the responsibility of the church to understand its mission now, and that is to defeat evil. And I think this whole globalist world agenda and breaking down every tradition, breaking down the idea of nationality, everything that our whole culture is built on is very evil. I think actually those people are promoting evil. And the church is not really aware of it, or try to close their eyes like this is not happening. So I think, unfortunately, things has to be much worse before we see that some church people will start to wake up a little bit and see that they should speak the truth and they should actually reveal what's going on and start to have the right understanding of what is compassion and what is what is Christian love and what is truth, which also is a concept that has been completely destroyed by the modernists. So I think Europe is in an extremely severe moral crisis. And you also see, when you look at what's going on at this campaign in America for the presidential election, there is a total moral bankruptcy in America as well. So it really reveals how bad or how low our culture has become. It's a very low point. So, the Western culture really needs to go through a deep renewal. And for me, it can only be a spiritual renewal. It will not, politics has completely failed. There is no politicians in the Western world that has any answers to this crisis. And many of those people who seems to be the winners are promoters of evil, and they have a spiritual agenda, and that is to crush Christianity. And you have to be aware of that. And that they are against God. They want to recreate the whole created order. Like for instance, this transgender movement, where children now are taught that they have no sex, they can just choose their own sex. It's a complete destruction of the created order, the order that God created. So it means that they think that they can recreate the whole world in their own image. And I think it's going to fail, but you really have to be very attentive to those signs that it's actually not a political fight, it's a spiritual fight, to completely erase everything God has created and to turn your back completely on God. This is what they want to do, and we know from history that they won't succeed, but it doesn't mean that the struggle to come back to truth is not going to be a real hard struggle. I think it will be.
Yeah, so across Europe, when you talk about the de-Christianization of the West and these different issues that you see, the influx of Islamic migrants and all these things taking place, which countries do you see dealing with it better? Like, my heritage is Dutch. My dad was born in the Netherlands. My grandparents on both sides were born in the Netherlands. And we see them basically mainstreaming suicide on demand now. Abortion's been there for a very long time, as has gay marriage, but they just announced yesterday that they're planning to make suicide available for those who, quote-unquote, are done living life. So basically, like we've always said, it's just suicide on demand. You've described the situation in Denmark. When you look across Europe, which countries do you think are responding best to this juggernaut that you're describing? Are there any countries that are holding on to their traditions and holding on to their faith, or is this sort of postmodern sweep something that's across the whole continent?
I think it's very interesting to see that it is the old Eastern European countries that are most aware of what's really going on, like Hungary, that really also Orban really stressed that they wanted to strengthen their Christian culture, and that's why they don't want this influx. And it's not being like racist or the hater of strangers or foreigners, but it's just a matter of, trying to strengthen your own culture. Otherwise, they know it's going to collapse. The old Eastern European countries, they know what they're up against because they just left communism. They just have gained their freedom. So they know what it's all about. Here for many of the younger generation in Europe, we only heard about Second World War from the history books. We have not experienced it. But you still have a lot of Eastern European people that still remember what it was like. So they know what is at stake. And I think it's also interesting to see that now it is the former communist countries that is strengthening the Christian faith and their Christian foundation, because they know without that, they are done. They're simply too weak. They're simply too weak if they don't have the Christian fundament under their culture, under the politics. And I really think that the weakness of Europe lies in their apostasy from the Christian faith, and will be the end of us. So we can learn from the Eastern European countries that if we don't go back to our Christian roots, it's very unlikely that we will survive as a culture, because that's what they experienced through the communist time. So I think it's good that we have those countries within the EU, but unfortunately, as you see, the EU agenda is very anti-Christian too. So Hungary was threatened that they would get kicked out of the EU because that they wanted to limit the influx of migrants. So that's very sad. But this is also the spiritual confrontation here in Europe, is that the former Christian countries are really looked upon as something that is not wanted in the EU anymore. I don't know if you have followed this debate, but
I have.
Clear.
There's one other thing that I want to get back to that you mentioned earlier, just because there's a lot of conversation over here on what's going on in Russia now. For example, we know Vladimir Putin is a bit of a thug, but what that makes Russia is entirely still up to question now. You might have seen Peter Hitchens' columns on why Russia is not the enemy, and he didn't understand why the West was making Russia out to be an enemy. Now, in the last just couple of days here, there's been some really strange rumblings about what's actually going on, and you've just been there. So can you tell us what's going on?
Well, first of all, I would say that everything you hear about Russia in the mainstream media is a totally misguided. I would say it is propaganda, negative propaganda against Russia, which has nothing to do with reality in Russia. I mean, you would be amazed to see when you go to, for instance, Moscow, how dedicated people are to the Christian faith and how the churches are full of people. And it's not true that Putin is just using Christianity for political goals. I mean, he really has understood the importance of Christianity in his culture, and he respects his people that wants Christianity to be the foundation. And also that it seems that he has gone through a personal development, because Putin is considered by Russians to be, a sincere, authentic Christian. I mean, I know from inside people in monasteries and things like that he often goes to monasteries alone to pray, and he's really very concerned about his faith. But that's a perspective you would never hear in Western media, because they simply don't know, and they have no idea, and they have no interest in trying to explore what's really going on. So it means that Russia is becoming, a Christian super power. And I think that's part of the reason why that the West is so angry with Russia, actually. I don't think it's so much about the politics. I think it is, again, like I said, you need to understand today's world from a spiritual perspective. And I think that all those people that want to deconstruct and destroy the Christian tradition is really enraged that Russia is now building its whole society on traditional conservative Christian values. This is against the whole agenda of the liberal West. So this is where the battlefield is actually taking place, and also that was what was going on in Ukraine. I was just together with a woman who had been a fighter in eastern Ukraine. She's very Orthodox. She's German, and she said that the whole fight was about keeping the Christian Orthodox culture without any influence from this secular, godless West. This is what's all about in Ukraine. And the Western media only presents it as some kind of political fight, but it's not. It's a spiritual fight. It's a Christian fight against, anti-Christian powers. And the Russian people are very aware that they don't want the ideas from the godless West to have any influence on Russia. They want Russia to be a Christian nation, and it's very, very strong in Russia. How orthodoxy is everywhere in their society. Even people who don't even go to church, they would still be in favor of it and think that this is the right thing. And being a Christian, like me, being persecuted in the West, like I think I am, at least psychologically, it's such a freedom to come to Russia and feel that this is a genuine Christian culture. You can speak freely. You would be treated really with a lot of respect, and you will be part of the really high social circles if you are Christian, because even to the top level, to the president, people are Christians, and they're working to build a Christian culture. So you think you're in a kind of fantasy land when you come from the West. So I always say that now we have the reverse situation. When I was a child, there were dissidents coming from the Soviet to the West to feel freedom to think and write and freedom. now it's the opposite way, at least for Christians. Now we need to go to Russia to have the freedom to practice our traditional Christian faith in freedom. So you, as a Christian, you feel you have much more freedom of speech and freedom to practice your faith in Russia than in the West. And if anybody had told me that when I was growing up in Scandinavia, where I was extremely afraid of Russia and, nuclear weapons and invasion from Russia, which was likely to happen for people in Scandinavia, if anybody had told me at that time that in 30 years you would stand on the Red Square and you will feel much more free as a Christian than you do here in Denmark, I would not have believed those people. I would have thought they would be out of their mind. But this is what has happened in my lifetime, and this is a huge change. And I think a lot of the tensions between East and West, what kind of society do you want? Do you want to respect the law of God, the word of God, or do you want to completely destroy everything God has taught and everything God has created? So I think this is the real fight, the real battle in our world today. It's about those people who want to build their own world and the traditional people that want to come back to the Christian tradition.
So what do you think Christians in Europe should start doing, and what do you think they should be on the lookout for? So obviously some countries are further progressed than others, but you see those sorts of things coming. What do you think they can do to prepare for that?
First of all, we need all to check ourselves about what kind of life am I living. How do I respond to God myself? Mm-hmm. All Christians need to ask themselves that question, because this change won't come from the hierarchy in the church. It will come from the people. It will come from the lay people. There will be a movement within the lay people that would be fed up with the hypocrisy of our leaders, their lies, and the way they don't care about the people anymore. They don't care about the people. They have a kind of intellectual agenda, which they're very thirsty for power, and the people are just considered like slaves. I mean, they don't really care about the people. They don't care about democracy. I mean, there are so many things anymore that are very undemocratic, and people have started to realize this, and how the media are on the side of the people who are in power, so they don't ask the right critical questions anymore. That's why you see so many independent media that is now being established. And because people are not stupid. I mean, they want to know what is the truth. So I think there is a lot of tensions in our society for the time being. At least there are here in Scandinavia, because people are divided. There are those who believe in this new globalist world order, and the rest of the people, half would want to go back to the roots. And I think many of those people are getting more and more aware that if we don't have Christianity as our fundament, we have nothing in Europe. That's where we came from. This is what was forming Europe for centuries. And if we have wasted that, we are just very fragile. We're very vulnerable. We have nothing. And the whole postmodern project has failed. And now we see a new group of people that are very religious in a way we are not used to, like the Muslims. They have a completely different set of values, and many people get very concerned about that. So I think that it probably is time for even non-Christian people to consider what is Christian tradition. And I think I see among conservative circles an openness I haven't seen just a few years back, to try to reconsider whether they should actually try to go to church and try to understand what is Christian faith, because they see that all political attempts to solve this crisis has failed. But the church in itself also has to wake up and become aware of its mission. And I think that can be something that is going to be hard, because many people in the church today have a false idea of what is love for your neighbor, love for the stranger. Because Christianity has become politicized in Europe. It means that you can only be a Christian or considered a Christian if you are for the open borders, if you agree that we should just accept all the refugees, all the foreigners. Otherwise, you are labeled as an evil person, a bad person. So the church has become very politicized. It's not anymore considered Christian to protect your family, protect your country, protect your nation like it used to be. And I normally say, why is it that my neighbor is always a stranger coming from a different country, a person I don't know, whereas my children, the next generation, people that are my actual neighbors, I really don't care about them. I just want to show that I'm a globalist. I'm an open person. I can live with all sorts of culture. This is now what is considered to be Christian, and I think the all Christian understanding of that you need to protect your life. You need to love yourself so much that you will protect your life, your family, your children, people among you, and your nation. That has been completely lost, and that's very dangerous because Europe is committing suicide, and that's not Christian. I mean, to commit suicide is actually a sin. So we are committing a huge sin to have this kind of politicized Christianity. So we need to really, really understand that we are on the wrong track when it comes to what is Christianity. And I think that is something that is it can be extremely difficult because there will be a fight even within the church for what is the mission of the church. But I think that there are some kind of awakening going on within the Christian churches, that if we don't act, there will be no more Christian churches in Europe. And I think this will make people understand that you need to probably change some of your views if you want to survive.
So one final question for now, I'm sure we'll talk again. What have you been working on lately, and where can our listeners find your work?
Well, they can always find me on Facebook. But right now I'm working to establish a video blog in English, actually.
Okay.
And I'm also doing some research for a book which is about how, like I was trying to explain here, that the whole crisis in Europe, the problem with migrants and with terrorists and Islamism, all comes down to the fact that it is a spiritual battle and not a political battle. And this is very important to understand, also if you want to know how to act. So I'm working on that to try to give that message to the Western culture that we are in a spiritual battle, we're not in a political battle. And also how that Christianity has been has changed it's what is the right word to say, or it has been changed in the sense that now it has become politicized, and if you don't have the right political opinions, you're not considered to be a Christian. I think that's very, very dangerous, and we have to come back to a kind of Christian protection of our own culture, which is not un-Christian to protect your life. That's not un-Christian. And if we don't do that, I don't think there will be a Europe in the future, at least not a Christian Europe.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this again.
You're welcome.